All right, so welcome. My name is Bert Scholl. I am Client Services Specialist at the Cancer Resource Center of the Finger Lakes. And this Living Well with Cancer webinar is brought to you by the Cancer Resource Center and the Cuga Cancer Center. Today's presenter is Mark Lukes, and he'll be presenting on acupuncture, a complementary therapy. So Mark, I'm handing it over to you. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Bert. Thanks for having me. And I just want to let everyone know, feel free to interrupt me at any moment, anytime. I'm going to try to speak more slowly. My default is to speak quickly. So I'm going to share my screen and start from there. Did everybody see that? You see that, Bert? Yeah.
I can.
Okay, so yeah, I basically started off with an exploration of perception of what's considered to be authentic and not authentic, and how our belief system influences the power of the medicine that we choose to use. And it's a really important topic in Chinese medicine, um, um, because there's so much intentionality that goes into the workings of an acupuncture treatment. So I'll just begin by talking about what I've got is the slide up here. And on one hand, you've got a bunch of pills and different words on them. And the basic idea is that Harvard has this program called the Program in Placebo Studies and Therapeutic Encounter, PIPS, that's been up and going for about 15 years. And the program was actually it was started up, and they basically under the auspices of the Harvard Medical School, and they asked an acupuncturist who had already been brought in as the only non a medical doctor on the Harvard School of Medicine's Faculty of Medicine, and they trained this man Ted Kapchuk in sort of the most up-to-date research, best practices, and taught him basically how to do research, at sort of the accepted, institutional level. And then they gave him this program to head up. And what he's done over the years is figured out that placebo is inherent in all medicine. He basically loosely describes it as the relationships and rituals that are inherent in all medicine. And I might jump forward, and we'll come to some slides that that touch upon the stuff later. But I'm just going to speak off the top of my head. So basically, when we're born, for the first 8 years or so of our lives, or maybe even up until puberty, our brains mostly operate in a theta wave state. And I'm not an expert, but I've read this a couple of different places, and there's a good book about it by a guy named Bruce Lipton. It's called The Biology of Belief. And basically, as adults, our brains are operating in a different wavelength than beta. But up until around 8 years old, maybe puberty, some say, we're in a theta wave state, which is the very same wavelength that is present when we're either in a deeply creative state, as a musician, artist, cooking, whatever, but a deeply, like in what people describe as the zone. It's also the predominant wavelength when we're falling asleep as adults or children. It's that sort of space in between wakefulness and sleep that oftentimes we do guided meditations in. And it also, for that reason, it makes sense that it's also the predominant wavelength when we're being hypnotized. So it's basically a wavelength that makes us very open to the possibilities of anything that we come in front of. We don't have a sort of a locked in kind of judgment of information when we're in a theta wave state. And that's important because when we're growing up, whatever we perceive to be medicine or to be truth, basically is hypnotized into us just by our surroundings. It's not some sort of like, conspiracy theory. It's basically evolution's way of allowing us to learn really rapidly social cues, survival cues, how to exist, in the world, and specifically world of gravity, but also the world of social gravity, you know. Um, so basically, whatever was considered to be medicine by our parents becomes our main paradigm of medicine. And my main paradigm of medicine was, I should say, and it still is. I bridge between Western medicine and Chinese medicine. I'm not an absolutist in any sort of way. Um, but I was raised very much with Western medicine, with a couple of exceptions. Um, my mom took me to a homeopath in France when I was about 5 or 6 years old. My dad was a diplomat, so we were Americans living in Paris, and I had some funny symptoms, recurring ear infections, funny bumps on my elbow, and homeopathy is actually, it's not the mainstream medicine in France, but it is a highly recognized medicine. So I'm a kid. I go into this doctor's office. Looks like a doctor to me. He's behind a big desk. He's got lots of books, gray beard, very serious guy. And he diagnoses my twin brother and me. I'm an identical twin. And then he gives my mom a prescription. She goes out and buys it, and she goes through this funny regimen of these little white pills and these sprays and suppositories. I mean, it was a totally different world from the medicine. I hadn't experienced a lot of Western medicine other than a surgery I had in my pinky for a cyst. So, I didn't really have a lot to compare it to, but I understood now that there was another kind of medicine. And maybe that's partly why there was a door open for me to get into something outside of what I was raised in. So I'm just starting off with that as, sort of a cue of how important perception is. So this is a slide of Ted Kapchuk. He's the fellow I mentioned before. He wrote a really interesting book called The Web That Has No Weaver, which is a bridging to text that bridges Eastern medicine, specifically Chinese medicine and Western medicine. And so part of the study that he did at PIPS at Harvard, this placebo institute, the first one I have listed up there is Maxalt, a Maxalt study. And Maxalt is a migraine medicine. It's a well-established pharmaceutical that treats migraines effectively. And so in this trial, there were three groups. When they received when they went into the trial, they were all suffering from acute migraines. And each group was given a different, the members of each group were given different envelopes. One group got envelopes that had Maxalt written on the outside, but actually had a placebo on the inside. The pill was a placebo. Another group got envelopes that had the word placebo written on the outside, and there was actually real Maxalt on the inside. And the results showed that in terms of statistics, the placebo, the real Maxalt didn't do any better than the placebo. When it came to Maxalt written on the outside with Maxalt on the inside, it was highly effective, 3 times as effective as the Maxalt that had been labeled placebo. So it's not to say that pharmaceutically trialed medicines don't work. At least, I mean, there's other studies that they've done on this with different pharmaceuticals. It's not to say they don't work; they're very effective, but our belief in them and our faith in them is very important. And it's going to bring me to another point later. Another example, another trial they did was an IBS study. And it was, again, 3 groups, and all the participants were suffering from irritable bowel syndrome, an acute case. And in this instance, there was no medication that was administered. The first group just simply received an intake form. Fill out an intake form, takes 5-10 minutes. The second group filled out the same intake form and then basically received a very simple 5 minutes sort of checkup with vitals, checking for vitals. And that's what the people doing the study referred to as the paraphernalia, part of the ritual of Western medicine. It's not to say that it doesn't actually collect real information, heart rate, blood pressure, checking the eyes, checking the ears. But there, as far as we're concerned, our perception of it is these are the tools of a doctor. So it's part of the paraphernalia that makes someone a doctor, if you're raised in that paradigm, like I was. And then the third one is the third group had the intake form, the paraphernalia of the stethoscope, otoscope, blood pressure, pulse, plus a 45-minute extended interview with at least one instance of safe touch, like a hand on a shoulder. So a doctor really listening to someone for 45 minutes and actually touching them in some safe way, during that talk and during that interview. And the results were, again, that the last one, unsurprisingly, the third group did really, really well in terms of affecting and mitigating their acute IBS. The first group didn't do very well at all. The second group did a little bit better, but the third group overwhelmingly better. And there's no medicine being administered. So it's just to say that the human touch, the element of having something like a support group, like what you all are a part of, is vital to healing. It's an element that can't be quantified statistically. Well, maybe it can in a social way, but it can't be quantified in a mechanical way, at least as far as I know, but it's vital to the effectiveness of whatever medicine someone is using or choosing to use. So I already went over this. How do we know what we know? And this is a picture of this fellow, Franz Anton Mesmer, and it's where we get our word mesmerize. And he is considered to be the progenitor of hypnosis. So I just wanted to bring a little historical figure into this. Here he is doing a sort of a famous experiment where he has everybody hooked up, and he's basically, they were convinced that he was a magician, that he was an effective that he was he was a medical doctor, but he convinced a bunch of people that he could help them. And so their reactions were were very real, because he's not actually administering any medicine. And there's a story about how he got started. He was basically working with a young woman, and she had great results from his he wasn't actually doing hypnosis like this. He was doing some sort of like thing where he believed that you could transmit sort of this invisible force. And I don't think he understood what qi was, or Chinese medicine, and I don't think that's what he was doing. I just think that the effect of what he was doing, the young woman really believed in him, and so he had great results. Because then they tried to duplicate this afterwards, other doctors, and it didn't work. And he got ridiculed and kept on track. He kept on trying, to do his research, but it wasn't until a couple of doctors, maybe generation later, that hypnosis really was considered to be valid. So yeah, I've touched on these points already. He believed in something called animal magnetism, and that's, again, just this idea of he believed that there was a force coming out of him that was doing healing. And I'm not saying that's not there's qigong healing in Chinese medicine. One of the aspects of Chinese medicine is qigong, but I think that it was more of just the power of suggestion in this case. And again, he had an authoritative relationship. He was a respected doctor, and then he had a certain ritual that the people who were successfully treated that he used with. So here we get into more into Chinese medicine. Let me just minimize this. Chinese medicine is really a medicine it's based on Taoist philosophy, the kind I studied with. Especially, I didn't study TCM, which is mainstream Chinese medicine. I studied classical Chinese medicine. And one thing that's different is I actually got to study with a lineage master whose lineage goes back unbroken to 300 Common Era. So most of the medicine that I learned is put into an historical framework, and there's a lot of stuff that I was taught to treat that TCM practitioners wouldn't believe is possible to treat. Um, and one of them would be like Lyme disease. Uh, there's a whole chapter of Chinese medicine that's a part of classical Chinese medicine that TCM doesn't know about, and there's a little background to that. Um, when Mao Zedong, the famous dictator of China, who introduced communism to China, or his totalitarian version of communism to China, when he when he finally came into power around 1949, 48, 49, he decided he needed a medical system that would treat the masses. Um, he believed in Western medicine, but he couldn't afford it. Um, the Russians wanted to give him a bunch of free Western medical supplies and Western medicine, but he didn't want to rely on the Soviets. He wanted to be independent. So he decided to try, after ridiculing acupuncture and herbalism, he decided to make he started to work at making a reductionist Western science version of Chinese medicine. And what that means is that uh, that he wanted to take certain set of symptoms and prescribe certain medicine for those symptoms. Whereas classical Chinese medicine was really about, first of all, I mean, treating people with Chinese medicine, but first of all, recognizing that every person is sort of every person has their own spirit, and every disease will affect every individual differently. And that's the premise that classical Chinese medicine begins with. And the more significant factor is part of, and what I'm telling is that um, when Mao did this, he cut out anything out of classical Chinese medicine that had any connotation of spirituality. And so there's a whole chapter on of Chinese medicine called superinfection syndrome, or Gu syndrome in Chinese. And superinfection is also translated as possession syndrome. So because of that religious connotation, Gu syndrome was completely struck from the curriculum of TCM. Whereas if you just refer to superinfection syndrome, well, you know, what they're basically saying is something that Western medicine recognizes today, that an infection can be so entrenched with Gu or mono, um, or malaria, um, that the parasite takes over the endocrine system and basically affects person's moods. And in the old days, before they had a Western framework to understand that, they referred to it as possession syndrome. So there's a simple explanation as to why Goose syndrome is translated in both, can be translated in both ways. But basically, there's a whole corpus of medicine that can effectively treat Lyme um, with herbs and acupuncture that most acupuncturists don't even know about. You'd have to study classical Chinese medicine. And fortunately, there are a couple of really great teachers in the US, and one of them's created a whole protocol for treating Lyme and other entrenched infections, including long COVID would also be considered a part of this superinfection syndrome. Um, so um, going on, I put a few things on here. Basically, being open to possibilities means not listening to statistics. It would be paying attention to stories, because every person, this is the important piece of why it's important to start with someone's spirit when I treat them, because every person has their own story. And so my teacher basically says, I don't treat cancer as a standalone practitioner. I can augment and help people with cancer. My teacher almost exclusively treats cancer because he's a master, and he really knows his stuff. And he suggests to us, if we're working with people who have a diagnosis of cancer, that they should really read. They should open themselves up to the possibilities outside of the purview of statistics. Um, and I put ET and Yoda on here because these were really. And when I was in my theta wave state, I was 5 years old when I went and saw the first Star Wars movie. And I guess I was around 9 when I was introduced to Yoda in the second one. And then I was about 10 years old when ET came out. So I had these sort of, Yoda was kind of like that was my introduction to Taoism, another, introduction to sort of something alternative, the power of being able to really have mind over matter. And then ET was really about a heart-centered approach to the world. His heart would glow when he could reconnect with his home. And when he was thinking about home, or when he connected with Elliot, his heart glowed. And we have this understanding that the heart can actually, the heart, a really open heart that practices joy can really boost someone's immune system. And that's really, really important. Getting more into Chinese medicine, uh, the strength, one of the strengths of Chinese medicine in augmenting any kind of Western medical cancer therapeutic is that it can really support the immune system. There's this understanding that there's something that in the body that's gone a little awry, and in Chinese medicine, the analogy that's used for cancer is akin to fire, and basically Chinese medicine is trying to keep the fire from spreading like a forest fire, and that's when a cancer would be considered to be metastatic if it's spreading like a forest fire. So the number one thing that I could do to augment, or that the Chinese medicine person could do, would be to work on augmenting someone's immune system by making sure that their food and their ability to digest food is really optimal, and also that their qi, the breath, the air that they're breathing, is optimal. And that's why I put this down at the bottom of this page. Da Qi is just basically a term for great Qi. And then it's going to sound funny, but food Qi is called Gu Qi. So like Gucci, like the famous, fashion brand. So Da Qi is a little less obvious. Da Qi does include the air we're breathing, and oftentimes exposure to toxic air can lead to autoimmunity or cancer. But what Da Qi also refers to is the environment that we're in, the social environment. Are we in a supportive social environment? The air we're breathing in, supportive of where we're at? Do they also have belief in the possibility for us to heal? And that's again why you know this center that you're a part of is so important, because it creates a really important air that you can breathe. I'm just looking at the slides, so I can't see anybody's face. I feel a little disconnected. I'm going to change that. I guess most people are blanked out, so just Bert. But so that's why places like the Cancer Resource Center are really important, as well as making sure that we're around individuals, family members who really believe in our ability to heal. One of my teachers' projects that he might not get to, but the other classical master in the U.S. is doing, is he's built sort of it's not remote, but it's basically a healing center that's away from their setting, so they can completely change the air that they're breathing, literally and figuratively, in terms of the surroundings. Um, and so let me move on to the next slide. So my teacher refers to oxygen as love. And I just thought this was funny because I remember the song Love is Like Oxygen by Sweet. Well, oxygen is like love to the body. It goes both ways. And this is commonly recognized actually with health in general and cancer too. Antioxidants are really important for helping mitigate and stop oxygen getting eaten up. Our bodies are like car engines, and the more oxygen the carburetor feeds into, or that gets fed into the carburetor, the more fuel gets burnt up and the more heat and the faster the car goes. That's great if you want to go fast in a car, but same analogy works in the body. And the idea is that if we can slow down the breaking down and use of oxygen, then we can slow down the fire, that's burning. And so I remember when I was first learning about antioxidants, it was confusing because like, well, aren't oxidants oxygen? But no, oxidation means less oxygen. So oxidants are basically things that break down oxygen and use it up. So we try to eat foods and do therapeutics that will counteract the breaking down of oxygen. That's just a little note there. So fear is a real biggie too. And because in Chinese medicine, fear is tied into the core of our body's immune system. We call it kidney yang. And you can sort of imagine that there's a sun lodged into each of our lower backs. It's our vitality. It's also our lifetime battery. And fear is totally natural human thing, human emotion, especially when faced with a crisis. But unmitigated fear sort of it wears down that vitality unnecessarily quickly, and it makes the immune system chaotic. And so I threw on this slide here, this this, I don't know if you all are familiar with this. This man who set up a cross line across between the World Trade Centers and walked it. And I mean, it's still something that's hard for me to believe, because I would never for any amount of money or anything. Obviously, even if I was trained, I don't think I would even try that. So I don't know what was going on through his thinking, but we're each our own universes in our own way. So fear in the immune system. And we talk about the antidote to fear is faith. And it's not religious faith. It can be religious faith, but it's faith that could be a part of one's overall faith. Faith in one's ability to heal. And it's something that my teacher also says a lot, that healing, that we can get help from the outside, and not to say that there's strong interventions that are necessary when someone has a diagnosis of cancer. That's where Western therapeutic approaches are really, really important. You need something that's really gonna be strong, and then you also recognize that the immune system and the body's ability to heal, along with these therapeutics that oftentimes are taxing on the body, the ability to heal is really ultimately sourced from within. And that's part of having a faith in one's ability to heal. And that's partly just recognizing that we have a lot more sovereignty. My criticism of Western medicine would just be that it doesn't recognize how much sovereignty we have in ourselves to affect our own moods, to choose what we're going to eat, to drink enough water, to not drink cold water. That's a Chinese medicine bias. But cold water, anything cold, ice, interferes with the body's ability to make optimal use of the food that we're eating. And I'm going to get into that a little bit more as we keep on going. So this is the same guy. I think his name was Petit, maybe Philip Petit. And he's on the left here. That's after he's come down. And obviously the guy to the left of the police officer is smiling. He was part of the support crew, because they're both in total states of ecstasy because they've just pulled this thing off. And here he is, the same officer I think is on the left. You can tell sort of from his facial expression, even though it's kind of like hidden, that he's laughing. And this guy, and Philip T, is balancing this officer's hat on his nose. And it's just, I brought it up because it's he's obviously in a very different state. He's in this very open-hearted state. And the officer is doing his job. It's not a comment on the police. Police have very difficult jobs, but it's basically just showing that he's in a very different mind state than everybody else around him, because he had this certain faith that he used to overcome his fear. So getting into food, you are what you eat. That's I grew up with that saying. But what I didn't grow up with is what you are what you can digest. And that's where Chinese medicine is a really effective corollary to Western medicine of any kind, whether it's a cancer treatment, autoimmune treatment, just general overall health. This is, what I'm going to share in terms of Chinese medicine's approach is really just for general health. So you are what you eat, but really you are, even if you eat the best food in the world, you eat organic food, that's grown locally. If your digestive system is suboptimal, if you're run down, for whatever reason, if you can't really break down that food, then you're not able to really make use of all of that nutrition. And the third one is really important. You are what you can excrete. That's an obvious one. There's something wrong with your large intestine, small intestine, your ability to get rid of toxins. That becomes a factor that Chinese medicine can manage effectively as well. I'm not saying that isn't, that's understood in Western medicine too. The digestion part and food being able to really break down well is where I think Chinese medicine has an advantage. So as I talk about food, I want to recognize that food is personal. Do we live to eat or we eat to live? We live in a culture that very much emphasizes eating to live. I throw a slide of a famous person in his younger years here on the left, who was famous for saying, eat to live was more important than living to eat. You want to take a guess, Bert?
Wait, what's the question?
Can you recognize the fellow on the left?
Gandhi, I bet that's Gandhi.
Yeah, that's right. It's Gandhi as a young lawyer. So
I think you said that Americans tend to eat to live, and I think you meant to say we live to eat.
yeah, I did.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
definitely what happens around here.
yeah. So yeah, I mean our advertising is all geared towards it. Speaking of hypnosis, and as children, we're we're exposed to all these messages on what how good we'll feel, or how cool we'll be, how socially acceptable. Our social health is equated with our physical health, and then they're telling us, they're basically encouraging us to eat poison. So we live in a culture very much that's based on living to eat rather than eating to live. Not to say that food that is good for you can't be tasty. Sometimes it takes a while to acclimate away from highly processed food because it's designed to be addictive. But so it's not to say that food should shouldn't be tasty, but oftentimes Chinese medicine foods that are recommended for treating for extreme inflammation or heat in Chinese medicine are on the blender side because they're cooling. And I emphasize food because it's the medicine. It really is medicine that's self-administered throughout the day. And also, I come from a very non-dogmatic tradition. There's no one correct diet for anyone, just like there's no one correct medicine for everyone. We have to decide what fits in to our belief system. I don't always go to Chinese medicine, but I do, a lot more than the rest of my family does, because I studied with a phenomenal, a teacher who's well versed in Western and Eastern medicine. He can explain, and it's so yeah. So anyway, there's no one right medicine for everyone. And this is something else that my teacher said. So basically, anything that we do for ourselves that is healthy needs to be rooted in joy. So if we're making ourselves miserable by eating food that we think is we're supposed to eat because it's healthy because your Chinese medicine doctor told you to, but you're miserable, that's not helping either. It really has to be a balance of doing what's working. Basically, we're encouraged to be our own head scientists of our laboratory. Obviously, if we're under the guidance of a medical doctor and we're following their protocols, it's really important to follow their protocols to be compliant. And then if we're doing food or something else to help our immune system, it's important to be compliant there too. But if something is making you miserable, then you have to check in and balance it out so it doesn't become too dogmatic for yourself either. If you're happy eating a certain food 3 times, every day for a month, not for every meal, but certain, sort of my teacher has taught classes on a therapeutic food approach to working with cancer, and sometimes eat a relatively bland food for one meal, every day for a month, and then You basically get tests and see how it's working. But if you can tell intuitively that it's not making you, that it's making you miserable, or it feels like it's making you too cold, because obviously there's a part of the balance in Chinese medicine is to try to quell the fire, then you have to follow your own instincts as well. Um,
Mark, this is Rick. I have a question for you
yeah, sure, Rick.
regarding this. Are you familiar with the book by John Furman titled Super Immunity?
No, I'm not.
I
But
would recommend that. It
okay,
speaks well and is inexpensive. Speaks well to what you were just talking about.
cool. Yeah, I'd love to find ways to bridge um, Chinese medicine with Western medicine. Rick, would you give me that title again?
Yes, it's Super Immunity,
Super
and the
immunity.
author is John Furman, Furman.
Okay, thank you, Rick.
Sure.
Okay. So I'm going to give you some information that sounds dogmatic, but I don't mean to be. Again, it's just you could try these if you want to. They're suggestions. They're basically suggestions for everyday health, but they do apply specifically to any kind of inflammatory condition or cancer, which again is considered to be sort of a hot, very hot condition in the body. So I have a couple pictures on the left, which basically showing the analogy in Chinese medicine, what heat does to the blood. The top one shows that, eventually that all that water would evaporate off and there would be no water. And that's what too much heat does to the blood. It basically, it steams away. It basically uses up the blood. The blood is a precious resource. Has a cooling quality in the body. And Western medicine understands this too. There's definitely an emphasis on alkaline foods these days when people are trying to deal again with any kind of heat. And because our diets and our lifestyles are very acidic. One simple thing, one simple example of that would begin going back to the breath. If we breathe shallow breaths, then we tend to hold on to more carbon dioxide and have less oxygen. Carbon dioxide is acidic, oxygen is alkaline. So the very act of breathing deeply can actually help to alkalize the blood in a very significant way if someone practices it, especially with meditation, any kind of meditation that slows down the breath. And then the picture down below is basically milk curdling. And we also talk about blood curdling from heat. And that creates stagnation, and that can lead to, basically places where blood gets occluded and you get inflammation in the body. Common areas of the body that get this sort of inflammation would be the knees, the hips, shoulders, elbows, joints. And I can explain that a little bit later if we have time. So hot foods, and especially in a place like Ithaca where we love our garlic. Garlic is relegated to um, herbal medicine. It's not to say don't eat garlic at all. In fact, if you feel like you're coming down with a cold or something, I'd recommend some garlic. Except that eating garlic every day is a regular habit, rule of thumb. It does these things to the blood. It heats it up too much and uses up the blood or makes it get static. And so it interferes with circulation and healthy distribution of nutrients around the body. Onions too, and that's based on a law of signatures. Basically, all the spheres holding heat. We use the law of signatures a lot in Chinese medicine. But there are alternatives in the alum family that are fine. All the stalks are fine. Shallots are fine. They don't compound heat in the body. Scallions, leeks, chives are all fine. Coffee and chocolate, those are the difficult ones because those are highly addictive. And tea is not included in the subset, though. If you drank 4 or 5 cups of tea a day, caffeinated tea it would be a similar contraindication. Coffee is just a very hot substance. It makes people's heart race, and if something makes you flush or your heart race, it tends to be a hot substance, like hot spices, like alcohol. So if someone came to me with a diagnosis of cancer, I'd recommend weaning down and coming to a stopping point with all of those. Cold drinks, the contraindication there is that anything cold that's out of the stomach is like an oven and it needs to be at an optimal temperature. Don't want it to be too hot. If it's too hot, you get reflux, nausea. If it's not hot enough, then you don't adequately digest the wonderful food that you're eating. So you can be eating that great, really nutritious food, but if you're eating icy drinks, drinking icy drinks all day long, then that is going to really interfere with the absorption, the breaking down and absorption of that nutrition. And I didn't even mention sugar, but sugar is it's hugely contraindicated for a lot of illnesses, bacterial infections. It does a real number. It does a crazy number on the immune system. Again, back to the analogy of a carburetor and using up too much oxygen at once. Refined sugar is like rocket fuel. It eats up so much oxygen. It also has a very cooling effect on the body. It's like there's an interesting balance of hot and cold in the body. It's not cooling in the way that we want it. It's so harshly cold the body immediately responds with an inflammatory response and creates a lot of heat. So even though sugar and white bread would be included, even though they're very cold in nature, they create a very reactive, like hot condition. So ideally, soups and stews are great. I'm sorry I kind of made this a little confusing. Eating food that's easy to digest is ideal. Especially in a temperate climate, all indigenous people, whether it was in China or Europe or North America, everything was eaten in a soup or stew form because it's the best way to hydrate. You can hydrate with just water, but it doesn't really soak into your cells as well. So adding some kind of electrolyte, lemon, which also creates an alkaline response, is good. Some lemon water. A little bit of salt is okay too. Salt is actually good for the kidneys, which has a cooling effect. Minerals have a cooling effect. But what it does is adding electrolytes like salt and electrolytes in lemon, or ideally the electrolytes that just are part of the food that becomes a part of your soups and stews. It just really sucks water into your cells. So ideally soups and stews, ideally all cooked food. I know that's another one that's challenging to our Western notion of what's healthy. A younger person or someone with lots of fire, or that doesn't feel worn down, could do salads. But even if someone is relatively healthy, I would still recommend only eating salads when it's hot outside. And really, as you get older, it does take a toll on the system if it's done every single day. And it takes a toll because the argument would be, well, raw food has more nutrition. It doesn't get used up by cooking it. But the counter argument, which I follow because of my understanding, is that even if there's more nutrition available in raw food, it's not truly available to the body because it can't break it down unless the person is young, or particularly young, like has lots of vitality. So I know juicing. I remember watching the movie about the I think it was Gerson, the Gerson method. So there are some therapeutics that are directed towards as cancer therapeutics, which I don't know much about. I know they do use juicing, and that can be done. Again, it's not effective if someone is already really worn down or yang deficient, if they get cold easily, if your hands and feet get cold easily, if you have a hard time maintaining body temperature, then I would say definitely no juicing. I would stay away from most uncooked fruit, like pear sauce, applesauce. Things that are easy to digest would be really good. Tropical fruits would be too cooling. Think about where something grows and who's eating it. The reason that tropical fruits are cooling is because people in tropical countries are dealing with too much heat, or a tendency towards being too hot. Prebiotics and probiotics, that's another piece of the emphasis on maintaining a really healthy, optimal digestion. It's really important to have enough fiber. You could take, capsules of prebiotics, but I mean, basically eating enough fiber will do the trick too. maybe capsuled, encapsulated, because it's easier to break down, and sometimes fiber for certain cancers and certain autoimmune diseases is not good. So, I would definitely rely on your doctor for that if they know about prebiotics. Probiotics are most readily, I would suggest getting them through fermented foods. So here's a little sidebar to the cooked suggestion. Fermented foods are considered to be cooked, enzymatically cooked. So I would not eat them out of the fridge. In fact, I wouldn't even eat cooked food out of the fridge. Should always be room temperature or warmed up, again, because we're trying to maintain optimal digestive system, and that really requires um, the food is not only cooked, but that it's warm or hot. And the soups and stews are especially good because that liquid just really warms up the whole body. There's a general emphasis on really switching to lots of vegetables because they're alkaline, especially the alkaline ones, like Chinese eat loofah. Okra would be something we have in our Western diet that's very alkaline, really great at relining the gut, So if someone's dealing with ulcers of any kind, reflux, um, any kind of breakdown, any issue that's comes from the breakdown of the mucosal lining of the gut, then things like okra are excellent and should be eaten a few times a week. An indication as to whether or not you're eating too much of something that's like okra would be if your stool is, if you see mucus in your stool. If anything, it should make your stool more efficient and easier, because that really relies, good healthy stools really rely on healthy gut mucosa. In general, less meat, but proteins obviously still really important. And people that are dealing with cachexia, basically is a condition where the muscles are wasting away, but the body's not really wearing down fat as much. In that case, eating meat is important if you have muscle wasting. And the bottom line is, if someone doesn't have an appetite, barring an ice cream sundae, they should eat whatever they find, whatever looks tasty. Because the most important thing in the end is to be able to eat. So, a lot of the suggestions get thrown out if someone just doesn't really have an appetite and they find something they want to eat, then eat it. And, that would include ice cream, actually. So let's next slide. I'm almost done. So there's a Chinese herbalism approach to general health and autoimmunity, and it's also used for addressing cancer. And there is supporting, whether it's supporting Western therapeutics. In fact, there is research that's going on right now within a Western medical framework on how this Fujian therapy can support. And basically, again, it's what I would consider to be the strength of Chinese medicine, is its ability to support the digestive system, and by supporting the digestive system, really supporting the immune system as it gets taxed by various therapeutics. And I just put this quote in about immunotherapy at the bottom. Immunotherapy is a type of medical treatment that harnesses the body's own immune system to fight diseases, particularly cancer. The principle behind immunotherapy is to enhance, target, or manipulate the immune system's natural ability to recognize and destroy abnormal cells, such as cancer cells. I put that there because that really is the main push of Chinese medicine. Chinese medicine can do things to clear as well. If you're working sort of in the realm of my teacher, he prescribe very strong herbs that would help to detox what are called fire toxins. And fire toxins are essentially what we would call cancerous cells in in Western medicine. So I'm just pointing out that Western medicine is recognizing the benefit of really working with the immune system and stimulating it in some cases. I think immunotherapy is historically cited in Western medicine as beginning in either the late 1800s or early 1900s. They noticed that someone who had a strep infection, their tumor disappeared. Basically, the strep infection stimulated the immune system to fight when someone's immune system was kind of worn down. The strep infection brought on a fighting response and helped to address the tumor. Well, side note, tumors are considered to be functional physiological response in Chinese medicine. It's kind of like a blister. If you get burnt, then there's a swelling that happens on your finger where you get burnt because the water sends water to cool off the fire. And there are tumors that become functional problems where Chinese medicine practitioner, like my teacher, would say, yeah, you have to have it removed because it's getting in front of the blood flow for the heart, where it's messy, it's interfering with the function of the liver or the lungs. But in general, a tumor is considered to be a physiological response to quell heat. So that's just a little side note. But basically, working with the immune system is really Chinese medicine's forte. I put on the left, I put this poster. This is a poster from the Marshall Plan days. It's an analogy that I like to use for Chinese medicine's emphasis. So, sometimes Chinese medicine uses punitive measures, meaning really strong interventions, like the common interventions in Western medicine's approach to cancer, like chemotherapy or like radiation or like surgery. Chinese medicine doesn't use those, but it will use very powerful therapeutics that can't be sustained for a long time that are, because if you introduce too much cold to the body to quell the fire, that could suppress the immune system. So this is just to show that the Chinese medicine's approach is kind of like a Marshall Plan. The idea is if you can get something that's really acute in check, then the real healing quality, and ability of the body can really kick in. And that's something that I think that some folks here already think about. So, fellow on the left is a make-up computer-generated version of. You look at the bottom line on this slide. Let's see. This is what they gave the name to this man who was discovered in the Alps about 20 years ago. He was frozen very quickly, so his skin was still intact. He was frozen 5,500 years ago, and he's got tattoos on his body. He had a medicine bag with him that had some of the herbs that we use, especially mugwort, which we use in moxibustion. And he had tattoos all over his body that correspond with modern day acupuncture points. He was obviously a traveler, and he probably spent some time in what we call China today. So it's just to point out that there has been a synergy between Western and Chinese medicine, or at least a historical precedent that goes way back. On this page, I also included, I don't know if there are links that you can click on, but I could always send them to Bert. Just a little examples. I just did little Google searches to see what kind of adjunctive therapeutic studies are being done on how acupressure or acupuncture is being studied in correlation to helping people with pain from cancer, nausea, headaches, inappetence. My teacher actually was asked by, I don't remember if it was the Mayo Clinic or Sloan Kettering or Beth Israel. He lives in New York City, but he actually gave a protocol for working with inappetence and nausea to a major cancer research hospital in New York about 30 years ago. And that's what I've listed on top, the Gucci protocol. It's a 5-needle protocol that basically helps deal with indigestion, nausea, reflux, simulates appetite if someone doesn't want to eat, helps basically the digestive system work. And I think that brings me just about to the end. Divergent channels, that's another topic I can get into another time. That's my teacher, Jeffrey Yuen. And that is my website, which is also listed with my name on the on my slide for this talk. So that's it, Bert. I'm going to stop sharing.
That was fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, for sure. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Like I said, if you do have a question and it's personal and you want me to pause the recording, I will. Or you're just welcome to ask or comment anything you like.
And feel free to email me too, or Bert. Um, you can get my email contact through my website. Um, and um, and yeah.
Like there's something you said that I really liked. And when you were speaking about, the importance of food and how, we are what we eat and you are what you can digest because so many processed foods include things that aren't food. NPR just recently did a report on that. We're eating things that aren't food
Right.
and our bodies have to manage them and they don't always manage them well. And then you are what you can excrete. But that was fantastic. But then for you to finish on, and if you have no appetite, if you're struggling to eat and you can eat anything, you know, by all means. And
Mhm.
I was, I can testify to that. When I was doing chemotherapy and radiation, I had no appetite. And my wife was like, "You're not eating." And I said, "I'm not hungry." And after a couple of days, she's like, "You have to eat." And I
Mhm.
finally said, "If I ask for what I want, you won't get it for me." And she practically started crying. She's like, "What are you talking about?" I said, "I want chicken wings and I want those fries with that cheap, horrible cheese on them."
Yeah.
She came back with enough to feed an army.
Yeah.
And it used to bring tears to my eyes when I'd share it because she's like, "Yeah, it's not the best thing in the world. In fact, I suggest you don't eat it. But if you like no calories is a whole lot worse." So when people ask me, I say, I don't give advice, but I tell them that story and I say, sure, take care of your body. But there comes a point when like I started to understand why sometimes there were sweets handed out when people were getting chemo. It's not that it's encouraged, but if you're gagging at the thought of eating foods, which can happen as a result of treatment, we would rather you had calories in
Mhm.
your body than
Yeah.
nothing at all. And it just I just have a lot of respect for you for acknowledging what I hear from you is you're addressing the human side
Mhm.
of the conversation and that yes, I'm treating a human and sometimes the human doesn't have the capacity, can't find it within themselves to do, eat the best diet and follow the ideal path. And you honoring that and recognizing that's treating the whole person because you're treating that part of them as well. And you're acknowledging and giving space for that part of them.
Yeah, that's definitely that's the
Thank you.
spirit. That's the spirit of it. Yeah. Yeah, because a lot of people who are um very authentically into sharing nutritional advice, um, whether they're trained as medical doctors or nutritionists, etc. I've never been so ill that they didn't have an appetite. So they can't speak from experience. And in the end, you have to eat.
Indeed. Indeed.
Yes, indeed. Uh, Mark, I have a question for you.
Sure.
In the invitation for this webinar, it mentioned acupuncture, and in the context of that, treating immediate symptoms, including neuropathy.
Yeah.
And peripheral neuropathy is one of the side effects that has been rather durable for me after the multitude of cancer treatments that I've received. I'm in remission now, but the peripheral neuropathy remains.
Mhm.
Um, Diet, similar to what we're talking about on what you've been talking about for the past bit, is absolutely helpful, but I've been advised to see an acupuncturist for this. And one of my concerns with that is that it may be treating the symptoms of the neuropathy as opposed to healing the nerve degeneration. Could you
Mhm.
speak to that briefly, if you have some knowledge of that?
Yeah, sure. I've never treated, to my knowledge, someone with cancer and neuropathy. I've treated lots of people with autoimmunity and neuropathy. And so the approach always is called sort of a root and branches approach. You're always trying to treat the underlying cause and also deal with and also treat the symptoms at the same time. So if someone's in extreme pain, they come to my office, I need to work, or even in moderate pain, I need to address the pain and also address the body's ability to heal from the pain. And so again, optimizing digestion
Mhm.
or the movement of blood flow is oftentimes implicated in neuropathy.
Yeah.
So both at the same time.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
So what I got from that is the acupuncture would be more geared toward the treatment of the pain symptom from the
Oh,
neuropathy,
just as
and
much about,
the nutrition, et cetera, would be more geared toward improving the blood flow, or can you improve the blood flow to the trunk and peripheral nerves as well using acupuncture?
yeah, no, acupuncture can definitely do both. Yeah. And then the food part is basically the person's homework. Um,
Hmm.
in order to really get the most out of the treatment, um, I suggest people, don't do vigorous exercise if that's their kind of like their habit for a few hours afterwards. Don't drink, don't eat sugar, don't have coffee. There's
Hmm.
certain things that say don't do. If you do, don't do them for half a day or a day after the treatment.
Hmm.
Ideally, don't do them at all. And then so that the nutrition part really becomes the person's homework.
Hmm.
And then there's herbal medicine too. But my specialty really is acupuncture. I do prescribe herbs for Lyme because they're tailored, or Lyme, or really any kind of goose syndrome, as I described before. And I can give herbs that help the digestive system, but it's sort of like a secondary training of mine.
Thank you.
Sure.
Mark, I did receive an email from someone in response to this presentation when I was posting it.
Sure.
She has not had cancer, but she asked if acupuncture is helpful in treating persistent hives.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. It's basically that's the immune system, you have to figure out what the underlying allergen is. And if the
Mhm.
allergen isn't present anymore, you have to basically gently let the immune system know that it can stand down. People who have any kind of allergic chronic allergies or or autoimmune conditions, it's because their immune system is just it's cranked up too high. That's why they have a difficult time falling asleep because the body is too vigilant to allow them to sleep. So, so yeah, so you have to deal with the allergen and and um and or the immune system's response.
Thank you.
Sure. And
Any
that
other?
goes into diet in a big way too, not eating inflammatory foods. I mean, I always just, there's three ways of doctoring, and they're all essential. The first one is the dictatorial stance, and that is basically a more martial approach. That's if someone's very sick and a doctor says you need to do this and this, and we're going to do this and this, that's a martial approach, and it has its place. The second approach is sort of the shoulder to lean on. The You could think of that classically more as a maternal role of it's where we get our clinic from, incline, of just letting someone know you're really there, good bedside manner. The third one is resonance. Does the doctor actually follow their own advice, or they walk their own talk? That's a lot more powerful than people realize. So when I'm talking to someone who has hives or allergies, and I tell them I would recommend they stop eating sugar, and I get kind of a bit of a scowl. I basically I have to like just let them know that they're the head scientists of their laboratory. It's really up to them. You know, I don't.
Hmm.
It's not my job to take that on for them and tell them what to do. Um, and maybe I do one of my friends, and she I also consider her to be a teacher. She's a student of the same master. She has a more dictatorial approach, and I think that could be effective too for a short period of time if the person's really willing to follow the protocol or not eat sugar, for example.
You mentioned Gandhi
Yeah,
earlier. I went to a talk by Arun Gandhi, his Mahatma Gandhi's grandson, and
cool.
he said that, yeah, it was really great to meet him. And he said that a woman came to Gandhi and said, "I'd like you to speak to my son and tell him to stop eating sugar. He eats so much sugar." He said, okay, I'll talk to him in a week. And then Gandhi came back and he said to the boy, you should stop eating sugar, essentially, you know. And the woman looked at him and said, after the talk, and said, it took a week for you to tell me that? And he said, a week ago, I was eating sugar. I stopped eating sugar to tell him to not eat sugar.
Yeah,
He
yeah,
wanted there to be integrity in his delivery. And
yeah, totally. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And as a practitioner, I have to address that all the time. I have a sweet tooth. I keep raisins around. I once in a while I'll buy chocolate, but it's like maybe once or twice a year, and I always can feel the effects because
mm,
I've gotten to a place where I don't eat much sugar. I love Gandhi. Gandhi's Gandhi is one of he's probably my greatest hero whom I've never met. My teacher is a hero for me too, but as far as my childhood of growing up and knowing what was possible in humanity, Gandhi's like my one of my few heroes.
I share that with you.
Mhm.
Gandhi's always been one of my heroes. And like in the American diet, food is genuinely addicting. And and life is hard.
Mhm.
Life can be painful, and we find things to pacify life. And sometimes
Mhm.
people pacify their life with food. And as you said, you can say to the person, I recommend you stop eating X, maybe
Mhm.
sugar or refined
Mhm.
foods. The person may not want to, and the response may be, I get it.
Mhm. Yeah.
Hard. We use some people, they want to avoid alcohol and they don't want to do this, they don't want to do that. And food is what they turn to. And it's honoring that. Like it's not an order to do it, but you're saying from my approach and how I can help you, that's gonna be a key component.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. It's a practice. Living well, being healthy it ought to be a non-dogmatic practice of just ultimately every step of the way not berating the self, a loving stance. And it doesn't mean we can't be disciplined at times with ourselves. Um, if the discipline becomes something that just feels like the air we're breathing, or it feels like a way of loving ourselves, then you know that it's genuine.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So if there are no more questions, I will say thank you, Mark, so much for presenting to us. Again, I thought it was fantastic. Very
Yeah,
good.
thank you.
This video will be posted on our YouTube channel, and we will have a presenter next month on Hospicare 101. That's just a